Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
And welcome to episode 34 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me as always is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibby Gibson. Mike, what's going on?
Just call me Mike.
I did.
Wow.
I wanted to switch it up a little bit.
Man, messed me up.
You don't even know what to say, do you?
Who's that?
Who is that guy?
Isn't that the guy that does the other podcast with you?
Gibby, how are you?
There you go. You know what? I'm getting better every day.
Does that put you back in your safe space?
Safe space.
All right, Gibbs, let's do our Patreon shout-outs. We have Alana Tippett, Heidi Langman, Samantha Woolwind, Fawn Olson, and Sarah Scagliarini.
Must be Italiano.
I think so. Scagliarini.
Probably make some good chicken parmigiano.
Who are you, the Godfather?
Rigatano.
Did you say rigatano?
Is it
I think it's...
Rigatini.
Rigatini. I think it's rigatoni.
Maybe it is.
Maybe it isn't.
Why you got Tony involved?
All right, so let's go into the vault.
AKA jail cell.
Or as we're now calling it, Gibby's jail cell door closing. It's giving him massive flashbacks.
It is, man.
Every time he hears it. But we've selected Olivia Flick, and Olivia's been with us since nearly the beginning, Gibbs. Continues to be an unbelievable supporter of the show.
She rocks.
She rocks. But all of our Patreon supporters do. We appreciate the ones that continue to support us. We appreciate the new supporters. But on top of that, Gibbs, we appreciate all of the people on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everybody that is supporting us in all these different ways.
Especially that one, you, that's listening to us right now.
Oh, the one you're talking to right now?
Directly, you. You know you are. Yes, you.
Somebody, you just made somebody feel real good.
They should. I was talking to them directly.
But it's a big deal. I mean, word of mouth, sharing our post, just talking about the show. I can't say it enough what amazing fans we have. And you all are the reason that the show is where it is today.
That is true.
Gibby and I never could have imagined it when we started this show that it would have gotten to the place it has, both True Crime All the Time and True Crime All the Time Unsolved. It's been unbelievable.
Been a good run.
And will continue to be a good run, right, Gibbs?
Absolutely.
Because you made it sound like it's almost over. It's been a good run, boys. Got to shut her down.
We're like Forrest Gump. We keep going.
All right, make sure you check out our newest episode of True Crime All the Time. It's a hometown story for Gibby and I. We picked a Dayton, Ohio story.
DAY.
About a man named Marvelous Keene that we like to call Marvelous.
Marvelous.
Horrible individual.
Yeah, actually, he really was.
Went on a Christmas killing spree with a whole bunch of people that he called his posse. Wasn't much of a posse, but that's what he called them.
Yeah.
They were horrible people too.
They were.
But it's an interesting story, nonetheless.
Always are.
And a lesser known case. It's, something we like to do, pick a case that not everybody is going to do, not everybody's going to talk about.
It does a lot of good for the tourism to Dayton.
Yeah. And we're trying to pump up the tourism here in our hometown.
Yeah, we're driving around in Mike's car, his truck.
By talking about one of the worst murder sprees.
We're taking to the different sites, point them out.
It'd be like when Kramer does the tour.
Yeah.
That's what it's like.
Yeah,
But you're riding around in the back of my truck.
That's right.
So got some new merchandise on order. Should be coming in next couple weeks. Got shirts, mugs, mouse pads, all with the new logo. So check out Facebook. Of course, we'll make an announcement, but the store, you can get through the store through our Facebook page or through our website. Either way. The QA episode is going to come out this Wednesday night. I know we said it was going to come out last Wednesday, but we had a couple of things come up and it kept us from getting that done, but it's definitely going to be out this Wednesday night. All right, Gibbs. So we are talking about the story of Maria Ridulph, and we're going all the way back to 1957, December of 1957.
Predates you and me.
Me, for sure. I think it does predate you.
It predates me. Man.
By a couple of years,
By
at
a
least.
lot of years.
So we start off on Tuesday, December 3rd, 1957, in a very small town called Sycamore, Illinois. This is near Chicago. December 3rd was a snowy day, and near Center Cross Street and Archie Place, Maria Ridulph, 7 years old, was playing with her friend Kathy Sigmund. Now, earlier that day after school, Maria and Kathy had a strange run-in with a guy in a trench coat who was trying to have a conversation with the two girls. This was around 4:15, and they were able to get away from him by ducking into a restaurant like they were going to use the restroom. And they waited for a while. When they came back out, the man was gone, but at the site where they had encountered him were some nude photos of women laying on the ground where he had been standing. So we're off to a very strange start here.
Yeah, it's a weird afternoon.
It would be very strange. And keep in mind, this is the 50s. Kids were maybe allowed to do a little bit more back then.
Yeah.
Because Maria's 7, Kathy is 8. They're kind of on their own, walking around.
It's like second, third grade.
That would not fly today in today's environment. So the girls go home for dinner. It was said that at Maria's house, they had rabbit thighs, carrots, and potatoes that night around 6 p.m.
When was the last time you had some rabbit thigh?
I don't know if I've ever had rabbit thigh.
Tastes like chicken.
You say everything tastes like chicken. So after dinner, the girls go back out again to Center Cross Street and Archie Place. They meet up. They're going to start playing again. And this is only about 3 doors down from where Maria's house was. And this time, a man named Johnny would walk from his parked car south of the intersection, come up to the two girls, but he would ask Maria if she wanted a piggyback ride.
Like you already said it, but today's world, there's no way you would just have your kids 7, 8 years old playing out on the street. I mean, there's just too many. We know we do the podcast. There's a lot of freaks out there.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gibbs. But back then, it was a much different time. The 50s versus 2017. It's almost like two different worlds in a sense. So Johnny would give Maria a quick piggyback ride, for about 20 feet or so, and then turn around. Johnny was asking both of the girls questions like, did they like to play with dolls? And of course they answered yes. Now, Maria was excited to show her doll off, and she runs home to get it, and then she comes back. But some strange things were happening in the interaction between Johnny and Kathy during the time that Maria was gone. Because it's going to come out later, Gibbs, that Johnny was telling Kathy that he thought she was pretty, asked her if she wanted to walk around the block.
And Kathy would say later in life that she really had this vibe that Johnny really liked Maria. Yeah, he thought Kathy was pretty, but she said she had this vibe that he really had this fix on Maria.
But Gibbs, this is a young man we're talking about telling a second or third grade girl, how pretty she is. I mean, something is not right. Now, alarm bells are probably not going off in a kid this young, though.
Not that young.
And in 1957.
Yeah.
Now, to you and I or any other adult listening, that would be DEFCON 5.
Well, you get nervous anytime someone says you look pretty, so.
I do. Somebody even looks at my kids the wrong way, it might go down.
Well, I know when I come in the studio, I'm not allowed to look left or right.
Just stare at the ceiling.
And find my way to my seat.
Using your hands.
That's right.
But at some point, Kathy starts to get cold, and she goes back to her house to get some gloves. And Kathy's memory would be that she left Maria at the corner with Johnny. However, when Kathy returned, there was nobody there. No Johnny, no Maria.
Kind of an eerie feeling.
Yeah, I think even at 8 years old, that would probably have been eerie, is my assumption. And Kathy would run to Maria's house and ask her older brother, Chuck, if Maria was there, but he would say no. And she would tell Chuck that Maria was nowhere to be found. So together, the pair go looking for Maria with no luck. And Chuck has to go home and tell his parents that Maria's missing. They've looked for her. They haven't been able to find her anywhere. Now, that's a sinking feeling, Gibbs. Has to be.
Oh, I couldn't even imagine, man.
I mean, I lost one of my kids at the mall one time for like 5 minutes.
Panic.
One of the most frightening moments I have ever had. And that was for 5 minutes.
Pretty shitty dad, man.
I am a shitty dad.
No, that's seriously, that's scary stuff, man.
No, it is. There's no doubt about it. It's almost like a feeling that's hard to describe, just in the pit of your stomach. And again, that's for 5 minutes. You know, talk about some of these parents that are missing kids for 10, 20, 30. In this case, Gibbs, we're talking about 60 plus years.
Yeah, frightening.
So Maria's parents joined the search, and about an hour into it, they decide to call the police for help. So you have the parents searching, the police are now searching, neighbors, other people from the town. They're all out looking for Maria. And they're not just searching, they're armed with guns. Because remember, this is 1957.
Yeah,
in a smallish town.
Yeah, you kind of took care of things yourself.
Because they don't know what they're going to run into. They don't know what kind of issue they're going to encounter. And they're not messing around. They're not taking any chances, to the point where it was said that they were demanding entry into people's homes to search for Maria. That's the definition of not messing around.
Hey, when it comes to kids, man, I think everything should be no holds bar.
So at the same time, police are setting up roadblocks. They're searching every car coming and going that they can. But later on, they would find out that there were 2 witnesses that heard a scream around 7 p.m. And when police go to check out this area that the witnesses say the screams came from, they find Maria's doll in an alley. And the doll is laying between a fence and a garage in this alley. That's not a good sign.
Not a good sign at all.
Knowing already how much Maria loved this doll, I mean, she specifically went home to get her favorite doll to show it off. The search continued. They brought in crop dusters, military planes. They brought in people on horseback. I mean, this was a big effort back in 1957. They didn't have all the technology that we do today.
Still pretty impressive, really.
That's what I'm saying. I think for that time, it was very impressive. And Jean Tessier was a friend of Maria's back then, and she remembers that day because her dad opened up his local store so people could get flashlights, batteries, anything they needed to help with the search. But again, Gibbs, there's no luck finding Maria, even with all the manpower, everybody pitching in. Nothing comes from these searches. About 3 days after Maria disappeared, J. Edgar Hoover actually sent his FBI team in to look at this case and run it. That's a big deal.
That is a big deal.
The director of the FBI sends a whole team in to run this case. It was said that there were several dozen agents sent into town. They worked out of a local hotel there in Sycamore, but they didn't have really any evidence to go on. And the one eyewitness they had, Kathy, was only 8 years old. So this was not a case that had a lot of promising leads and a lot to go on. All the agents could really do is to show Kathy Sigmund a bunch of mugshots in the hopes that she would recognize the man she knew as Johnny.
And Kathy would later say that it was about 2,000 pictures that she looked at. That's a lot. But somehow this 8-year-old was able to narrow it down to about 10 or 12.
That she thought looked most like Johnny.
Johnny, exactly.
That is a lot, Gibbs, for an 8-year-old to leaf through 2,000 pictures and somehow narrow it down to 10 or 12.
So even back in the 50s, they had a sexual predators list. But back then, you were on that list if you were just a peeping Tom. Not saying that it's okay to be a peeping Tom, but I think it's a little different today. But back then, if you were a peeping Tom, you got put on that list. So they went through that list, pulled those people in, interviewed them to see if they had any potential leads out of that as well.
It would be 5 months before Maria was found. On April 26, 1958, the case went from a kidnapping to murder when Maria's little body was found partially clothed 90 miles away. And it was found near this town of Galena, Illinois, by a local couple, and they found her under a fallen tree as they were searching for mushrooms. And Gibbs, this is very sad because when they found her body, it was said that it was clear that birds and animals had fed on it.
Yeah, it kind of made me nauseated, when I was researching this, and to the point that they also thought, well, maybe it was like a, dried out deer hide, or it was like a dead dog carcass with bones. And
well, and that's what's so sad. I mean, this couple stumbling upon this little girl's body didn't even know right away that they had discovered a little girl.
Yeah.
That's how bad a shape her body was in.
Man, it's a nightmare. Even with her being partially clothed, that stuff was faded and worn out.
And because of this, the autopsy would be of no help in determining Maria's cause of death, just because of, there's no other way to put it, Gibbs, how bad a shape her body was in. They were only even able to confirm that it was actually Maria through dental records.
I mean, thank goodness they had that back then.
Yeah.
Now the one thing I that was interesting for me was because the body was found within the state, not outside of the state line, at that point, the FBI involvement was over, and then it fell back onto the local and state police departments.
Maria was laid to rest in a small white casket with over 300 people attending her funeral. Now, Gibbs, the police did have a suspect early on. Like you said, they questioned all known sexual predators. Police would also get a tip that would lead them to want to speak to Jean Tessier's older brother, John Tessier, about this case as well. And later on, Jean would recount this story as the FBI and the police coming to her home, questioning both her mom and her brother, but her brother John had an alibi, and her mom backed up that alibi. But what Jean would say when she was older was that she knows her mom lied to cover for John because, as she said, her mom did it a lot, and Jean never recalled seeing John at home during the time that both John and his mom said he was. So basically, his own sister, Gibbs, is coming out and saying that John's alibi that he gave to the FBI and the police back then, even backed up by their mother, was not true.
And his alibi will come up a lot in this story.
But because of the corroboration of John's alibi by his mom, the FBI and the police, they don't they don't pursue this one any further. And of course, like we said, we know they found Maria's body 5 months later. And it's going to be a very long time before the police would have any new leads. And when I say long time, this is longer than what we normally...
Yeah, you're meaning long
We're
time.
talking 50 years.
That's long.
Is going to go by. This case is going to be cold for that long. And it's amazing after all that time that a case could heat up all of a sudden.
So it wasn't until 1994. Now, this is when Jean Tessier, she's going to talk about her mom and how her mom was on her deathbed. And her mom made a very shocking statement. And at the time her mom makes this statement, both of Jean's sisters, Jan and Mary, were at the bedside. And her mom says, those two little girls and the one that disappeared, John did it. John did it, and you have to tell someone. I mean, that's pretty profound thing to say. You know, it's like she's trying to get the guilt off her chest for covering up, maybe.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these type of things come out in what you would call this form of deathbed confession. If she really covered for John back then, that probably ate away at her inside for a long time, and she knows she's dying. She has got to get this off her chest. And the other thing, Gibbs, is this isn't one person's account. Like you mentioned, all three of her girls are there, and they all hear the same thing. And all three of these women are John's sisters. So she tells her daughters that she wants them to take care of this issue. I mean, it's basically her last wish.
Yeah, really. I mean, clear the conscience before I go.
And about 2 weeks later, she dies. So at this point in time, the dad is still alive, but the daughters don't trust him. So they never approach him to tell the dad about what their mom has said about John. Now, the three Tessier daughters, they had another brother besides John, and they do decide to tell this other brother what their mom had said on her deathbed. But the four siblings, Gibbs, they're not all on the same page about this thing. They're not 100% sure that John actually had something to do with the disappearance and murder of Maria. But what they decide is that because it was their mom, because she told them on her deathbed, they make a pact and agree to support what their mom wanted and to stand by each other as they take this information to authorities.
So the first thing they have to do is that they need to decide who's going to call the FBI. So Jan steps up and she calls the FBI, but she also calls the Sycamore Police Department. Now, they're going to go ahead and they're going to look into John. But they did say he had a really strong alibi at the time, showing that he was miles away from where Maria went missing. And additionally, on top of that, they gave John a polygraph and he passed it. It would be another 10 years, so 2004, that Jan would make another attempt to get the case open on her brother. Now, she would take another chance and randomly email the state police. And a few days later, she got a call from an agent from the state police department. So now this time she finally found someone that seemed more interested in the story, and they assigned an agent, Agent Hanley, and he asked her to share, greater detail about what her mom said, what she knew, what the siblings knew. So after talking with them, Agent Hanley first interviewed Jean in person and asked her why back when Maria went missing, that her mom lied about John's whereabouts. Now, Jean will tell the agent that she doesn't really know why, just besides the fact that her mom always covered for her brother a lot. Jean told them her brother was not at home, like her mother said. Jean also felt she needed to tell the agent how much John abused her sexually, and would also state that her father also abused her. And to make this even worse, the mom knew that this abuse was going on and didn't do anything about it. Now, by the time that this interview occurred, the dad was also deceased. So neither of them can verify the story.
All right, Gibbs. So we mentioned the alibi earlier on, but now I think we have to get into the specifics of it, because when John's mom covered for him in the very first interview, what she basically said was that John was home.
Yeah.
And we've talked about how his sisters don't believe that that was the case. They don't remember seeing him. But John gets interviewed again and now has another alibi at some point. And this alibi involves being in Chicago the morning of the murder, taking a physical to be inducted into the Air Force. So he's in Chicago the morning that Maria is abducted. And then around 7 o'clock the night that she's abducted, John Tessier makes a collect call back home from Rockford, Illinois, which is about 40 miles away from Sycamore, where he lived. That's his alibi, because it's thought that initially Maria was abducted 6:30, 6:45, 7, somewhere in that time frame. So if he's making a call at 7, he can't be in Sycamore abducting her at 6:35 or 6:45 or 7 o'clock, obviously.
Right.
But there's a big gap in time there between that induction ceremony in the Air Force to the time where he makes this collect call. So 2 things are verified, but all the time in between that is not. Now, John would tell investigators that he took a train into Chicago for this exam and all this induction stuff into the Air Force. But there would be friends of his in town that would later say they saw John driving his car in Sycamore 2:30 in the afternoon time frame. So we're talking about alibis, Gibbs, but we're also kind of talking about holes as well at the same time.
Yeah.
Because you have this new set of investigators on the case. They're looking at all the evidence. And I think in particular, they're looking at the timeline. Because back in 1957, as we mentioned, it was thought that she vanished sometime between 6:30 and maybe even as late as 7 o'clock. And a lot of this was based on statements by Maria's mother giving the timeline of when she went out to play after dinner, when she came back to get her doll. But the investigators are going to figure out that she later says that these times could have been much later than what they actually were. Because Maria's mother is going to say at one point, Gibbs, that she could have gone back out even before 6 o'clock. Remember, we said that initially they had dinner at 6. She probably didn't go out to play again until 6:30. But some of this information is going to change a little bit over the years. And somewhere in the file, investigators find out that at some point, Kathy's mom says that the time that Kathy went out was 6:02. So it's much earlier than what initial versions would be of the timing. So these new investigators, they start to think that Maria was probably taken no later than 6:20. Big difference. And what it does is it starts them down the path of thinking that John's alibi still gives him enough time to come back from Chicago, to abduct Maria, to make it to Rockford in time to make his collect call around 7. It's like we said, it's 40 minutes. So, bottom line, Gibbs, they're starting to think that his alibi, which has excluded him all these years, is not quite as good as what everybody thought it was.
Yeah, you can see some holes in it.
And these investigators, they're going all out because they actually go to Florida, track down John's girlfriend that he had at the time Maria disappeared. And they're talking to her. And one of the things that they're wanting from her is to know whether she has any photos of John from back in that time. Because apparently, Gibbs, he'd been expelled from high school. So there was no high school yearbook photo of him. And this girlfriend, 50 years later, actually digs up a photo of her and John at a dance. And she mails it into the investigators. When they take the photo out of the frame, behind the photo is a government-issued train ticket. And the significance of this is that this is the ticket that John was supposed to have used to travel to Chicago for his induction exams. And what they notice about the ticket is that it was never punched.
That's a problem.
That's a problem because they actually go as far as contacting some trained historical society to figure out what would have happened back in 1957. They look at the ticket, they say it's real, and they also say there's no way he could have used it because it would have been punched back then. So they have a picture of John from back in the day. They've got this ticket, and now they're thinking that if John didn't take the train into Chicago, he most likely would have taken his car, which means he could have driven back at any point after that induction exam, which fits into some of his friends saying they saw John that day.
Yeah, because it would be an hour 15-minute drive.
Yeah.
From Chicago back to Sycamore.
The induction stuff was early in the morning. We know there's this huge time window until he makes the collect call in Rockford at 7.
Now, isn't like the picture that she sent, isn't it signed on the back like Johnny?
Yeah. No, it actually says love Johnny.
Yeah. So back then he went by Johnny.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt. Now, tie that into Kathy's recollection of who she talked to on the corner. She talked to Johnny.
Yeah.
So investigators are, they're chomping at the bit. They feel like things are starting to fall into place. And speaking of Kathy Gibbs and the picture that they got from John Tessier's old girlfriend, they take this picture and go talk to Kathy. And they show her a photo lineup, and one of these pictures is the one that they received. And from all the pictures, she picks this one out as the man that she knew as Johnny and saw that day. Now, we are talking about 50 some years later.
Pretty good memory.
But for her to pick that out is amazing. Now, but I go back to what a traumatic experience that would have been for her, even at 8 years old. Would that man's image have been so seared into her brain because of that traumatic experience?
I think maybe. And I also recall when I was researching that Kathy's mom, within 24 hours, I don't remember if it was that night or the next day, told Kathy, don't ever forget what that man looked like.
Because someday it's going to be important, probably, or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, she was very right. Illinois State Police agents would locate John Tessier. He was now in Seattle. But John had changed his name to Jack McCullough. And he would tell agents that the reason he did this was to honor his late mother's maiden name and her family.
So he takes the last name
of his mother's maiden name.
So why change your first name? Just curious.
Because you don't want people to find you, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. They show John, or now Jack, if we want to go that way, the same photo lineup that they showed to Kathy. And John says that he doesn't recognize any of the men in the photographs. Gibbs, one of the photos is him.
Yeah, and he doesn't even recognize himself. Or does he?
Yeah, exactly. Things are starting to look a little strange. So they've got some Washington State officers along with them, right? So it's kind of a joint effort. Illinois State, Washington State officers. They escort him back to a local station to do an interview. Now, at this point, he's 72 years old. And Agent Hanley from Illinois tells Jack, "We think you killed Maria." Jack starts to get very defensive at this point, says it had nothing to do with it.
Back in December 3rd, 1957.
Maria.
Maria, exactly.
Yes.
We've been going through and doing some new interviewing and new investigations regarding that.
Yeah, I'd be glad to help with that.
And there's been some discrepancies in, interviews that we're having, and that's why I'm trying to find these things out to try to see what happened, what went on, and whatever. And I'm looking for you to be as candid as you can and be as remembered as much as you can.
I'm trying, but you're barking up the wrong tree. Because there's nothing there.
I may be barking up the wrong tree, but I'm trying to find out what happened on the day and where you were on the day she disappeared.
I already told you.
Well, but
I spent the entire day in Chicago that day.
Your mother says to Janet and Mary that you killed her. I think that's what she was thinking that you did here, and I think...
No, this is bullshit. It's all bullshit. My mother wouldn't say that.
Your mother did say that.
She didn't.
Yeah.
No, she didn't.
You said when you were younger, you had a sexual encounter with your sister. Accidentally, on purpose, whatever. Doesn't matter. That was the only time that happened? As you got older, there could have been other times.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this doesn't make me a suspect in a murder.
Did I say that?
I did not kidnap that little girl. You look at my eyes. I did not have anything to do with that little girl.
Okay.
And she was loved in the neighborhood. She was a little girl with big brown eyes, and she was sweet as could be, hardly said a word to anybody, and everyone loved her.
Okay.
This was crushing for the entire
for
city.
Community.
And
Absolutely.
It was crushing for me as well, because I knew the family. And between you and me, I want the person who did that to be strung up.
What do you want to happen though?
The electric chair.
Now, what you don't hear him say on the tape, and it's very interesting, Gibbs, he actually makes a statement during this interview saying that he knows who the killer is. And what he says is that the suspect they're looking for looks a lot like he did back then and was about the same height.
It's a strange thing to say.
Very strange thing to say, unless you're trying to throw police off.
Right.
I don't think they're buying it.
So after the interview, at this point, the police, they felt they had enough to move forward and charge Jack with Maria's murder, kidnapping, and abduction.
On that December evening back in 1957, Maria's friend Kathy Sigmund recalled being together outside when a man called Johnny asked if they wanted to play. Kathy went to get her mittens, but when she returned, Johnny and the little girl were gone. Maria's body was found the following April. Police in Washington, acting on a tip from Illinois, arrested and charged Jack Daniel McCullough, a 71-year-old former policeman from the Seattle area, with kidnapping and murder. Back in 1957, his name was John Tessier. He was Maria's neighbor. When questioned by police then, he said he was on a train to Chicago when she disappeared. But 3 years ago, after he had changed his name to McCullough, an old girlfriend produced an unused train ticket of his from the very same day. That sparked an intense focus on him and more.
We've been fairly astonished at the recollection of some of the local residents.
And more than half a century later, this case is no longer cold.
So, Gibbs, I think we have to talk a little bit about the life that John Tessier, eventually Jack McCullough, led in the years before he was arrested, right? Because, like we said, this guy's in his 70s. He's lived an entire life at this point since 1957. He served in the Air Force for 13 years, eventually making it all the way up to being a captain. And after his military service was over, he moved to Washington State. And ultimately, Gibbs, he becomes a police officer. But he had a lot of issues as a police officer. There were a lot of complaints about him, not only internally about his work, but there were complaints about his conduct from outside the department as a police officer.
That's not good either.
It's not good. And one of them in particular was very disturbing because a story would come out about a 15-year-old girl who stated that John Tessier molested her in 1982 at the time that he was a police officer, and he would actually be charged with statutory rape for this offense. She testified against him in court, but somehow John was able to plead this down to a misdemeanor for communication with a minor for immoral purposes, which is kind of sad to me, Gibbs, because mean, the story that this woman tells, well, back then she was a kid.
Right.
And actually testified on the stand what he did to her. Later on, she would talk about it as an adult and even in more detail.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible, period, but it makes it even worse because it's somebody in the community that you should be able to trust yourself completely around, so it even takes it to another level. You shouldn't have to worry about a police officer is sworn to protect you to do something like this.
No, I agree. Now, he did lose his job as a police officer, which he should have. I'm just angry that he was able to plead it down to a misdemeanor after this type of conduct with a 14, 15-year-old girl.
Yeah, because what does that mean to her? That he just basically gets a slap on the wrist.
And she has to go through it for the rest of her life.
Yeah. I mean, he'll say he didn't do it.
Well, and he also says that he didn't have the money to properly fight it, or he would have. He says a lot of stuff. All right, Gibbs, so let's get back to after John is arrested. The state attorney wants to exhume Maria's body to see if they could locate any DNA, or any other evidence for that matter, that could help tie someone to her murder.
For 53 years, the grave of 7-year-old Maria Ridulph was undisturbed, her unsolved murder case as cold as the ground that held her coffin. But this morning, her remains were exhumed to see if modern science and DNA can support the authorities' belief that they've cracked this case at last.
This was the murder of a 7-year-old girl. We want to bring the best minds available to us to have them conduct a thorough examination of her remains.
But unfortunately, after the exhumation, they don't find any DNA. They don't really find any evidence that would tie any one person to her murder. But there is a forensic anthropologist who looks at the body and sees a number of nicks on her sternum, on her neck, and they would conclude that they thought she was stabbed multiple times with a knife. So really, Gibbs, all they have at this point is circumstantial evidence against John Tessier, right? They don't have any DNA. They don't have any...
Well, because the physical evidence that they did have, which the only thing they had was the doll that they found, it got misplaced, never located, so they can't even test the doll for any type of DNA if the suspect actually touched it.
Because of this lack of evidence, the state attorney decides to make a change and charges John Tessier with the statutory rape of his sister when he was home on military leave when she was only 14 years old.
And so the reason that they could charge him at this time, because there was no statute of limitations, because when he came home, he was active military when he came home to Sycamore, and the alleged rape occurred. Then he went back to wherever he was stationed. And because he never returned back to Sycamore after that, the statute of limitations never went into effect. It's an interesting law in that area. I don't know if that's a national law or if that's a state law, but it applies to him on this case.
But I think it's very interesting that you bring it up, because I would have thought, Gibbs, if you would have just asked me, I would have thought, oh, there's no way he could be charged 50 some years later because the statute of limitations would have run out. But there was one big problem with this, and it was that his sister Jean didn't want this information to come out. Yes, she did tell the state's attorney this, but she wanted it to be confidential.
Yeah, I think she gave it more as a backstory to her brother's makeup, his, what type of person he was. If he was willing to sexually abuse his own sister, what was he willing to do, with a potential 7-year-old, 8-year-old, whatever, right? I think that's why she wanted to share that story. She didn't realize that the state attorney and the state agent would elevate it up to the point where they would move forward with charges.
No, because I think to back you up, I think what she was doing, or what she thought, was that this was going to be more of like a building block to them ultimately charging him with murder. And what it ended up becoming was the case itself.
Yeah, and I think she kind of felt maybe like she was a pawn.
Betrayed,
Yeah,
a little bit. I think, so we're not outing her by saying her name. I mean, she's done a number of interviews talking about this incident. And it's on April 10th, 2012, that Jean has to take the stand in a Sycamore courtroom and talk about the alleged rape her brother committed upon her when she was just 14 years old. And she would say that even after all the years that had gone by, her having to talk about it was like reliving that very day. And it was so difficult for her to retell these events.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. I don't think you ever forget that. Just being raped would be terrible, but to be raped by someone that you should trust,
Your siblings,
your family member.
And Michelle Weinman, who was the 14-year-old girl that said John molested her back in Washington, she actually testifies at this trial as well. Again, to exactly what John did to her when she was a teenager. Jack and his defense team decided to opt for a judge trial versus a jury trial. The trial lasted 4 days. His defense team would call 2 men that lived in the home where the rape was alleged to have occurred back then. And these 2 men would say that they didn't know anything about it. They never saw anything like that. And this was a lot like the murder case against him, Gibbs, because there really wasn't any physical evidence to go on. You're talking about something that happened a very long time ago. So all you have is eyewitnesses.
He said, she said.
Yeah. You have the victim telling their story. You have the defense trying to counteract that. And in the end, the judge finds John Tessier not guilty
Of raping his sister.
Correct. Because just 5 months later, the state moves forward with the trial for murder. And again, like we talked about, this case, there was no physical evidence. It was all about eyewitnesses. John's sisters testified against him. And we're talking about 50 plus years after it happened.
And this was a big controversy at the time because the state attorney was up for election. We've heard this before in other cases where they typically will take a case because of the popularity and move forward with it to try to win
Votes. Yeah. Or public pressure.
Yeah. So it was that the case. I think that the state attorney at that time would say no, but I think a lot of people, the buzz was that it was, and that it was not a good reason to take it to trial. But at the end of the day, they took it to trial.
Now, as the trial started, Tessier's dealt a pretty big blow because the defense was trying to get any testimony related to his mother's deathbed confession thrown out. But the judge ruled that he would allow it to be heard. And then you had 3 different jailhouse informants testify that Jack confessed to them. One inmate in particular, now this guy was serving a sentence for murder, so you have to weigh that. But he claimed that Jack told him that he killed Maria by accident. Jack's defense team relied heavily on his alibi, which we talked about, and it's the same one that he told the FBI back in the day. It was confirmed on that day he was at the induction center joining the Air Force in the morning. It was confirmed that he made a collect call from Rockford, Illinois around 7 o'clock that night. So the argument, as we mentioned, Gibbs, was the timeline. A lot of it came down to that. And the defense was dealt another blow when the judge ruled that the FBI documents from back in the day would not be allowed to be introduced into trial because there was no one still alive who had signed any of those documents verifying the information. And the reason why this was a blow to the defense is because the FBI documents kind of detailed out his alibi. So I think the thought is, Gibbs, if the FBI believed his alibi back then, why shouldn't it be believed today or at the time of trial?
Yeah, and heard.
The defense also put forth that the police at one time thought that they had the killer of Maria Ridulph back in 1997. And this was a man named William Redmond. And Redmond was a truck driver, carnival worker from Nebraska. He had died in 1992, but police thought that he was a very, very strong suspect in the case. He had actually been charged in 1988 with the murder of an 8-year-old girl from Pennsylvania that happened all the way back in 1951. So a lot of similarities there. He was also a suspect in a 1951 disappearance of a 10-year-old from Ohio. But since he died in 1992, they never got to interview him, Gibbs. And ultimately, the judge would rule that this evidence was not allowed to be presented at trial.
So that's another letdown for the defense, for sure.
Yeah, they've had a series of blows, setbacks in trying to present their case. So on September 14th, 2012, John Tessier, Jack McCullough, whatever you want to call him at this point, is found guilty of the murder of Maria Ridulph. In the decision, the judge said that he found credible all of the prosecution's witnesses, and that extended, Gibbs, to all of the jailhouse informants.
Which you typically don't find that you believe all 3 of jailhouse informants.
Yeah, their credibility is usually a little bit questionable, but Tessier gets sentenced to life in prison. And for his own safety, once he gets to prison, he's kept in protective custody. He's locked up 23 hours a day because you got to remember, this guy is at the bottom of the list.
Yeah, so he's a ex-police officer, and more importantly, he's been found guilty of murdering a child.
He's got a lot of things going against him in prison. He's going to have a lot of people wanting to come after him. But on April 15th, 2016, there's a hearing in an Illinois courtroom where a judge vacates his conviction. So he spent almost 5 years in prison. His conviction gets vacated, but the judge does order a new trial. But that trial would never come because just a week later, the charges against him were dismissed. But they were dismissed without prejudice, meaning that, he could be tried again at some point. And it's not until this year, April 12th of this year, that a judge actually declared him innocent of the crime, meaning he's done.
He's done. Can't be retried.
So that's why it's unsolved.
Yeah.
Now, I think a lot of people look at this one as solved, more so than the other ones that we've done, Gibbs, where it was solved and then somebody's ultimately freed because they figured out that they couldn't have done it. I think there's a lot of popular opinion that he may have done this.
But the courts have said he's innocent.
Correct. So technically it's unsolved.
There you go.
And that's how you get on True Crime All the Time, Unsolved.
That's exactly right.
But this is a fascinating case for a lot of different reasons.
You just said that the final ruling was this year. So if you think about the span of time that this case has been open, still open,
Yeah.
but has been active. I mean, we're talking 1957, still talking about it in an Illinois courtroom in 2017.
But you're talking about what, 60 years?
Yeah.
57 to 2017.
I mean, your suspect's what, almost 80 years old by now.
That's the story of Maria Ridulph, tragic, young girl. And the thing, Gibbs, that really gets me about this one is I really don't think this one will ever be solved. Based on everything that's transpired, based on the number of years that's gone by, I don't think it'll ever be solved.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
That much time goes past. Witnesses have died. Potential suspects have died.
All right, Gibbs, before we get out of here, let's play a couple of voicemails.
Hey, Mike and Gibby, it's Ali from Sydney, Australia. Love the podcast. Great to listen to. I've listened to all the episodes. And I just thought I'd share with you about Peeping Tom. You guys weren't sure, or you said you weren't sure where it comes from, but it's linked to the story of Lady Godiva, whose husband was imposing a heavy tax on the townspeople. So she negotiated with him to, if she rode through the town naked, would he reduce the taxes? Now, all of the townsfolk really loved her because she was very kind to them. So they all had an agreement that they wouldn't watch her ride through the town naked. And they all stood firm on that agreement, except for one man called Tom who peeked through his shutters. And that's where the saying of Peeping Tom comes from. Anyway, keep up the great work, and we look forward to your next cast. Thanks. Goodbye.
All right, so great voicemail, great accent, digging that accent.
Lady Godiva.
Well, and we also learned something. So it's got a dual purpose. It's interesting, Gibbs, because I think that comes from one of our True Crime All the Time episodes. I mean, you actually talked about Peeping Tom in this episode.
But isn't that funny? Lady Godiva riding naked through her town gets her really famous. Yet you ride your bike through your college town naked. And did you get famous from that?
No, I actually got arrested.
Known as a real Frank the Tank kind of a guy. Yeah.
We're going to KFC.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. This is Carmen from Ludington, Michigan. I actually emailed you guys a few weeks ago because I had quite a list of suggestions or big episodes that I wanted to hear about, and I was just wondering, I had a few more for you. The first one is a local case about the disappearance of Catherine Phillips, also known as Baby Kate. You may have seen it. The mother of Baby Kate was on Dr. Phil not long after she disappeared, so it's possible that you may have seen that. Some other ideas I had were the White House Farm murders and the DeFeo murders. Thank you again for creating a great show. Keep up the good work and keep your own time ticking. Thanks. Bye.
So first, I just want to say I don't watch Dr. Phil. I just want to get that out on the table right now.
No, thank you so much, Carmen, for the voicemail. And she mentioned some very interesting cases, Gibbs, some that are pretty famous.
Yeah.
And I know that we'll do them at some point.
Yeah, I believe we will.
I have them on my list.
You got a big old list.
I do have a big list.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. This is Alyssa from New York City. I just wanted to tell you that I'm absolutely obsessed with listening to your podcast. I teach kindergarten all day, so it's very nice to actually listen to some murder episodes, because sometimes that's what I feel like I want to do during the day. So it's nice to get it out through podcasts instead of real life on little 6-year-olds. So not really. That's a joke. But thanks. You guys are awesome and you're so funny. I'll be laughing to myself during your guys' little banter back and forth, and people look at me like I'm crazy. But yeah, you guys are great. Thanks for everything.
And see, Gibbs, we help another person. She gets her anger, channels it into the podcast, and then she's able to shape these young minds. We're doing all this good, man.
Except you say we're doing all this good, but you were just saying off air how you wanted to edit out where she said she was just kidding, and leave it out there like, I want to murder these kids,
I could take some of these voicemails and change them around so they sound much different.
But, such a sweet, innocent voice, but I don't know. Nah, I loved it.
She's channeling it. She's using the podcast.
That's right.
We're helping people, man. All right. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.